Russia's involvement in the 5-year-old Syrian civil war took a troubling turn this week when Moscow announced that it is using an airbase in western Iran to launch strikes against Syrian militants. The move comes amid reports that Russia is building up its military presence on its western border, sending tens of thousands of troops to newly built installations within striking distance of Ukraine. David Satter is a former Moscow correspondent and a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. He's author of the new book, The Less You Know, the Better You Sleep, Russia's Road to Terror and Dictatorship under Yeltsin and Putin. So, David, welcome to the program. Let's start with the news about the troop buildup on Ukraine, the border with Ukraine. Russia says this is in response to NATO's buildup, but NATO's buildup is minor, and it's not inside Ukraine. What's going on here from Putin's point of view?
I think that Putin is trying to intimidate the West. Obviously, they can't be responding to a NATO buildup which is not taking place in Ukraine. But he's definitely trying to show that Western sanctions will only make him more aggressive. And therefore, the Western countries should see reason, remove the sanctions, and under those circumstances, it's possible that his appetite for Ukrainian territory will be tempered. Of course, there are alternative strategies, including arming the Ukrainians and increasing their ability to defend themselves. But that's not what Putin is hoping the West will choose.
Well, of course, President Obama has refused to sell lethal weapons to Ukraine. But 8 years ago, at the last year of the Bush administration, Putin invaded Georgia in Central Asia, and they still have part of that territory. Now, this is 8 years later, the last year of the Obama administration, presidential transition coming up. Do you think an invasion inside Ukraine again is possible?
It's certainly possible, but it's absolutely not guaranteed. We just don't know whether what's taking place now is an attempt to intimidate the Ukrainians in the West, and of course to further destabilize the situation inside Ukraine, or whether it's a serious preparation for invasion. If it is, of course, the West will have to think very carefully about what kind of measures can be undertaken to prevent even further aggression and loss of life in Ukraine.
So how much of this is about domestic Russian politics? That is, the last couple of years with Western sanctions and with the fall of the price of oil, the Russian economy has suffered. Now, Putin's poll ratings are still high, but could this all be, and I point to the Syrian flights as well via Iran, is this an attempt to stir up domestic nationalism on Putin's part?
Oh, definitely. In fact, it's important to bear in mind in the case of Russia that war is an instrument of foreign policy, of domestic policy. The Russian leadership, and this is not only Putin, this is also Yeltsin, started wars in order to boost the support of the population for the regime, whichever regime it happened to be, and to distract the population from the way in which they were being misruled.
Okay. It's interesting. The last two American presidents, Bush and Obama, both went into office saying, we'd like to work with Putin. At the end of their administrations, they're both saying something very different. Now Donald Trump is saying, if I become president, wouldn't it be great if we could have a good relationship with Russia? Do you think that makes sense on Trump's part, or would he have a very rough education if he did win?
He will have the same education that every other American president has had, except for Ronald Reagan, who had an instinctive understanding of the Russian political culture and the Soviet Union. The fact is that we are guilty in the U.S. of ignoring the atrocities that have been committed in Russia and closing our eyes. I mean, when the reset policy was initiated by President Obama, it came in the wake of evidence that the Russian government, for example, had been involved in the poisoning, the nuclear poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko in London and the murder of Anna Politkovskaya in Moscow. And to start a reset with a regime guilty of such crimes is totally unrealistic.
Do you
and
think,
of course we
go ahead. Yeah. Do you think?
No, well, and of course we've ignored the most important crime, which was the 1999 apartment bombings, which brought Putin to power.
Do you think Putin wants Donald Trump to win, and would he meddle in the American election campaign?
He might well meddle in the American election campaign, but I think people in the United States overestimate the extent to which the Putin regime is counting on one or another of the candidates to win. Trump has said many uninformed and inappropriate things. But it's also true that when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she, with full access to intelligence information that she apparently either ignored or didn't understand, initiated a policy of reset that was based on an image of Russia that has no relationship to reality. So I don't think that the Russians think there's going to be some gigantic difference if it's Trump or Clinton. They understand that there's superficiality on both sides.
All right. Thank you, David Satter. Very interesting. Thanks for coming in.